Everyone remembers the beast. Almost no one remembers what really happened. That's how legends work, isn't it? The details blur, the timeline compresses, and what remains is the feeling. The shape of fear pressed into memory like a handprint in wet concrete. Hard, permanent, real enough to touch. But let's start at the beginning. The actual beginning, not the one that's been polished smooth by retelling. Bray Road cuts through Walworth County, Wisconsin, like a scar through farmland. It's not a particularly notable road. 2 lanes of cracked asphalt, no streetlights, bordered by drainage ditches that fill with runoff every spring. During the day, it's the kind of road you'd use as a shortcut without thinking twice. County Road BB intersects it near the old cemetery. Highway 11 crosses it further south, near where the Jensens used to grow soybeans before they sold to a corporate farm. At night, though, Bray Road transforms. Not into anything supernatural, just into what every rural road becomes after dark. A tunnel of visibility surrounded by absolute blackness. Your headlights carve out maybe 100 feet of reality. Everything beyond that is theoretical. The corn could be 6 feet tall or 60. The tree line could be 20 yards away or 20 feet. Distance loses meaning when darkness is the only constant. December 1989. Late in the month, close enough to Christmas that most people had their minds on other things. Shopping lists, family visits, the persistent cold that settles into your bones when you live this far north. The temperature had dropped to the low 20s. The kind of cold that makes car doors stick and breath hang visible in the air long after you've exhaled. Fog had rolled in from the fields that evening. Not unusual for this time of year, especially after a mild day followed by a sharp temperature drop. The moisture in the air condenses, hovers, turns the familiar landscape into something from a dream, or a nightmare depending on your disposition. Someone was driving home. We'll call her the first witness, though she wasn't really first. There are always earlier stories, earlier sightings, earlier moments of unease that never quite crystallized into anything reportable. But she was the first one people remember. The first one who told someone else. She worked second shift at a packaging plant in Lake Geneva. Her route home took her down Bray Road because it shaved off maybe 5 minutes compared to taking the highway. 5 minutes matters when you've been on your feet for 8 hours and your bed is calling. The radio was on. Classic rock, probably. That's what most people listen to around here. The heater was blasting because her car, a 1985 Buick with over 100,000 miles, took forever to warm up. Her mind was already home, already in her flannel pajamas, already asleep. She rounded the curve near the cemetery. There's a spot there where the road bends slightly to the left and dips down before rising again. If you're not familiar with it, you tap your brakes instinctively. If you drive it every day, you don't think about it. Something moved into her headlights. Her first thought, deer. That's everyone's first thought on rural roads. Deer are everywhere, suicidal and unpredictable. They dart across roads at the worst possible moments. They freeze in headlights like they're posing for a portrait. They cause thousands of accidents every year across Wisconsin alone. But this wasn't moving like a deer. Deer move with a particular rhythm. They bound, they leap, they have a verticality to their motion. This was different. Horizontal. Heavy. Deliberate. Her second thought, that's too big to be a dog. Her third thought never fully formed because her brain was too busy flooding her system with adrenaline. The primitive part of her brain, the part that remembers when humans were prey, screamed one word, run. But she was in a car. You can't run in a car. You can only drive. So she kept driving, hands locked on the wheel, eyes wide, breathing shallow. The thing crossed the road in 3 strides. Not 4 legs. 2. Upright. Hunched but unmistakably bipedal. Covered in dark hair or fur, shaggy and unkempt. Shoulders broader than any man she'd ever seen. Arms that hung too long. And eyes. When her headlights caught them, they reflected back. Not the green gold of deer eyes or the sharp white of raccoon eyes. Something amber. Or red. Or both. The color shifted in a half-second before it disappeared into the tree line. The whole encounter lasted maybe 5 seconds. 5 seconds that felt like 5 minutes. 5 seconds that would replay in her mind for the rest of her life, each viewing slightly different, slightly more detailed, slightly less certain. She made it home, parked in her driveway, sat in the car with the engine running for 10 minutes, hands still on the wheel, trying to convince herself she'd imagined it. She hadn't imagined it. She'd seen something. What that something was, that was the question that would haunt Bray Road for the next decade. She told her husband that night. He listened with the patient expression of someone who loves you, but doesn't entirely believe you. Probably a bear, he said, or a big dog. Maybe a deer at a weird angle. You were tired. She knew what she'd seen. But doubt is a virus. It creeps in through the cracks. By morning, she was less certain. By the end of the week, she'd almost convinced herself it was nothing. But then she mentioned it to a coworker. Just casually. Hey, I saw something weird on Bray Road. And the coworker's eyes went wide. You too? That's when she knew. She wasn't alone. She wasn't crazy. Something was out there. And that something had a name it didn't know yet. A name that would transform it from an unexplained encounter into a legend. Everyone remembers the beast. Almost no one remembers what really happened. Because what really happened was complicated and uncertain and deeply human. And legends don't have room for that kind of nuance. Legends need monsters. And Bray Road was about to get one. Elkhorn is the kind of town where everyone knows the high school mascot and nobody locks their doors. Population hovering around 10,000, give or take a few hundred depending on whether you count the folks living just outside city limits. The sort of place people describe as quiet, which is usually code for boring. The sort of place young people leave and middle-aged people move to. Main Street has everything a small town needs and nothing it doesn't. A hardware store that's been there since the 40s, still run by the founder's grandson. A diner with vinyl booths patched with duct tape and coffee that tastes like it was brewed during the Carter administration, which some regulars swear it was. A movie theater that shows films 3 weeks after everywhere else and still sells tickets for $6. A library that doubles as a community center. A post office with hours that seem designed to inconvenience everyone equally. The town square has a gazebo that gets decorated for every holiday. Red and green lights for Christmas. Pumpkins for Halloween. Flags for the 4th of July. Someone, usually the same someone for the past 30 years, plants flowers in the spring and makes sure they survive the summer. Nothing ever happens here. That's what people say. That's what they said. Past tense matters. The landscape around Elkhorn is aggressively normal. Farms with red barns that look like they were painted by Norman Rockwell. Silos standing like sentinels. Cows standing in fields doing what cows do, which is mostly standing. Fields of corn that stretch to the horizon in the summer and turn into stubble in the winter. Trees that turn colors and fall exactly the way trees are supposed to, on schedule, predictable as tax season. It's the kind of beauty that's so expected it becomes invisible. You stop seeing it after a while. It's just background. Just the set dressing for your life. But isolation does strange things to perception. When you live surrounded by miles of empty fields and forests that go dark at 5 in the afternoon in winter, your relationship with the unknown shifts. The woods aren't just woods. They're everything you can't see. Every sound that doesn't have an obvious source becomes a question. Every shadow that moves wrong becomes a possibility. The people here aren't superstitious, not exactly. They're practical. They have to be. Farming doesn't leave room for magical thinking. Your crops grow, or they don't. Your equipment works, or it doesn't. Your livestock lives, or it dies. Reality is direct and unforgiving. But practicality doesn't erase instinct. And instinct remembers things that civilization forgot. Instinct remembers when the darkness held things that could kill you. When forests were dangerous not because of what you knew was in them, but because of what you didn't. Modern humans like to think we've conquered that fear. We've got streetlights and cell phones and Google Maps. We've categorized every species, mapped every ecosystem, eliminated most of the predators that used to hunt us. But get far enough from the lights, late enough in the night, alone enough in your thoughts, and that ancient fear comes creeping back. The certainty that something is watching. The prickle on the back of your neck. The urge to move faster, look over your shoulder, get somewhere safe. Elkhorn had that fear, buried under layers of routine and rationality. Most of the time, it stayed buried. Most of the time, the sheriff might have been on the job for 12 years. He dealt with drunk drivers who thought they could make it home on back roads, domestic disputes that turned ugly on Saturday nights, the occasional meth lab tucked into a barn on the county line, kids breaking into the high school, vandalism, petty theft, the usual small-town crime that's mostly people making bad decisions at vulnerable moments. He was not prepared to deal with cryptozoology. That wasn't in the training manual. There's no protocol for monster reports, no form to fill out, no chain of command for werewolf sightings. Mike was a practical man, solid, reliable, the kind of person you want showing up if you called 911. He believed in what he could see, touch, and arrest. Everything else was speculation. But he was also a public servant. When people called with reports, he listened. When they came to the station with stories, he took notes. When they asked what he was going to do about it, he said what he could. We're looking into it. What else could he say? That they were crazy? That they were lying? That what they saw wasn't real? You can't tell someone their experience isn't valid, even when you're pretty sure it isn't. The diner waitress, Carol, had worked the night shift for 2 decades, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. She knew every trucker route, every regular who couldn't sleep, every strange character who wandered in smelling like alcohol and bad decisions. She'd heard every story this town had to tell. The affair between the mayor and the bank teller. The farmer who went bankrupt and shot himself in his barn. The teenager who disappeared for 3 days and came back different. Small towns are full of secrets, and diners are where secrets go to die. Carol had a sixth sense for wrongness. You develop it after enough years watching people when they think nobody's watching. She could tell when someone was about to start a fight, about to break down crying, about to do something stupid. In late 1989, she started feeling that wrongness everywhere. Not from people, from the air itself. Like static before a storm. Like the pressure change before an earthquake. Something was coming. She didn't know what, but she felt it in her bones. She mentioned it to a few regulars. They nodded like they understood, but they didn't. Not yet. The farmer whose name everyone forgot lived on 300 acres adjacent to Bray Road. He'd been working that land for 40 years. He knew every animal that lived there. The deer that bedded down in the southwest corner. The coyotes that howled in the ravine. The owls that hunted from the oak tree near the property line. The occasional black bear that wandered through in late summer, looking for easy calories before hibernation. He'd seen plenty in his time. Birth and death and everything between. Nature isn't gentle. It's efficient. It's brutal when it needs to be. He'd found deer torn apart by coyotes. Chickens massacred by foxes. Calves stillborn in the spring. None of that bothered him. That was nature doing what nature does. Circle of life and all that. But what he would see on Bray Road, what he would encounter on a night in early January 1990, that bothered him. That violated something fundamental about his understanding of the world. He wouldn't talk about it for months. When he finally did, he'd start the story 3 times and stop twice. The 3rd time, he'd get through it, but his hands would shake and his voice would crack. Because he knew animals. And what he saw wasn't an animal. Or it was an animal that shouldn't exist. Either way, it meant the world was stranger than he'd thought. And at his age, that realization was terrifying. Elkhorn wasn't ready for what was coming. No town is ever ready for its own mythology. But ready or not, Bray Road was about to put this quiet corner of Wisconsin on a very different kind of map. The first official report came in on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are statistically the most boring day of the week, which makes them perfect for disruption. Mondays have the drama of starting over. Wednesdays have the hope of being halfway through. Fridays have the promise of freedom. Tuesdays have nothing. They're the day you survive, not celebrate. December 31st, 1989. New Year's Eve. Most people were preparing for celebrations, counting down to midnight, making resolutions they wouldn't keep. But not everyone parties on New Year's Eve. Some people work. Some people drive home alone on dark roads, thinking about the year that's ending and the one that's beginning. Lorianne and Drizzy was driving home from her job at a bar in Elkhorn. She worked until close, which meant she was on the road around 1:30 a.m. January 1st by the time she hit Bray Road, technically. A new year. Fresh start. An opportunity for things to be different. Things were about to be very different. She was heading southbound on Bray Road, a route she'd driven hundreds of times. She knew every curve, every pothole, every place where the road dipped and your stomach lifted slightly if you were going fast enough. The night was clear. Cold but clear. A three-quarter moon provided enough ambient light to see the outlines of fields, the dark masses of trees. Her headlights cut through the darkness, and she was thinking about nothing in particular. Maybe what she'd make for breakfast. Maybe whether she'd remembered to turn off the coffee pot. The mundane thoughts that occupy your mind when you're tired and alone and just want to be home. Then she saw it. On the right side of the road, maybe 30 feet ahead. At first, she thought it was a person. Someone hunched over, maybe looking at something on the ground. Maybe having car trouble. Her instinct was to slow down, see if they needed help. Small-town courtesy. You don't leave people stranded. But as her headlights illuminated the figure, her brain started revising its assessment. Too large to be a person. Too bulky. Covered in grayish-brown hair. Hunched forward but clearly bipedal. The thing was kneeling or crouching at the edge of the road, arms extended forward. It had large, human-like hands. She could see the fingers, long and distinct. The arms were muscular, visible even through the fur. And then it turned its head to look at her. The face was unlike anything she'd seen. A long snout, canine but not quite. Pointed ears on top of the head. Eyes that caught her headlights and reflected them back with an amber glow. The expression, if you could call it that, wasn't aggressive. It was evaluating. Curious. Intelligent. She was doing maybe 35 miles per hour. The whole sighting lasted 3, maybe 4 seconds as she passed. The creature watched her car go by, turned its head to track her movement, then returned its attention to whatever it had been doing. Lorianne didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She kept driving until she was home, then sat in her driveway with the engine running, trying to process what she'd seen. She was absolutely certain of what she'd witnessed. This wasn't a glimpse. This wasn't a shadow or a suggestion. She'd had a clear, unobstructed view of something that shouldn't exist. The next morning, January 1st, 1990, she called the Walworth County Sheriff's Department. She spoke to the officer on duty, described what she'd seen in careful detail. The officer took notes. He was professional, courteous, and clearly skeptical. But he wrote down everything she said. That report sat in a file for a while. Not because it was ignored, but because what do you do with a report like that? You can't dispatch officers to hunt for a werewolf. You can't issue an APB for a bipedal creature with amber eyes. There's no protocol. But Lorianne's report wasn't alone. That's what made it significant. Because once you start looking, you find that other people have been seeing things too. They just haven't reported them. 2 weeks earlier, a postal worker named Scott Bray had encountered something while delivering mail on rural Route 1. He'd been driving his mail truck in the late afternoon, still daylight, but the sun was low and shadows were stretching long. He saw what he initially thought was a dog in the ditch. A large dog, maybe a shepherd or a husky that had gotten loose. He slowed down, considered stopping. But then the animal stood up. Not on 4 legs. On 2. It stood easily, naturally, like bipedal locomotion was its default. It was tall, over 6 feet, covered in dark fur. It looked at him, and he looked back, and for a moment, they were just 2 beings acknowledging each other's existence. Then it turned and walked into the woods. Not ran. Walked casually, like it had all the time in the world and no fear of humans whatsoever. Scott Bray didn't report it. He mentioned it to his wife, who suggested he'd seen a bear. He mentioned it to a coworker, who laughed and asked if he'd been drinking. He stopped mentioning it. But when Lorianne's report made the rounds, when people started talking about something on Bray Road, Scott remembered. And he realized he wasn't alone. A high school teacher named Russell Patterson had his encounter 2 months before Lorianne. Late October, just after dark. He was driving home from a parent-teacher conference, exhausted from explaining to parents why their children weren't trying harder. He saw something on Bray Road crouched over a deer carcass. Roadkill, probably. Hit by a car earlier that day. The creature was feeding or examining it, or doing something that Patterson couldn't quite make out. When his headlights hit it, the creature stood. Slowly, deliberately. It turned to face the car, and Patterson saw its full form. Massive, easily 7 feet tall when fully upright. Covered in coarse, dark hair. Arms that hung to its knees. A face that was more animal than human, but with an expression that was definitely intelligent. They regarded each other. Patterson, frozen in his car. The creature, standing in the middle of the road. Then it stepped to the side, into the ditch, and vanished into the darkness. Patterson was not the sort of person to make things up. He coached baseball. He wore sweater vests. He belonged to the Rotary Club. He voted in every election and recycled diligently. He did not believe in monsters. But he saw what he saw. And unlike Scott, he did report it. He called the sheriff's office the next day, described what he'd encountered, and was met with polite skepticism. His report also went into a file. Another data point. Another unexplained incident on Bray Road. By early 1990, there were 5 reports. Then 7. Then a dozen. Different witnesses, different times, but similar descriptions. Bipedal. Covered in fur. Large. Powerful. Wolf-like face. Intelligent eyes. The reports were consistent enough to be compelling, but inconsistent enough to be frustrating. Some described the creature as 7 feet tall. Others said 5.5. Some saw gray fur, others brown, others black. Some said the eyes were red, others amber, others yellow. But the core details aligned. Something was on Bray Road. Something bipedal, something large, something that didn't fit into any known category of Wisconsin wildlife. The sheriff's department couldn't ignore it anymore. Not because they believed it, but because enough people were reporting it that it became a public concern. People were scared. They were avoiding the road at night. They were calling in asking what was being done. Sheriff Mike decided to investigate. Not because he thought he'd find a monster, but because he needed to provide reassurance. He drove Bray Road at night. He searched the ditches, the tree lines, the places where a large animal might hide or bed down. He found nothing. No tracks. No scat. No evidence of anything unusual. Just a road, some fields, some woods. Normal Wisconsin countryside. But the reports kept coming. And with each report, the creature became more real. Not physically real, necessarily, but culturally real. It had a location. It had witnesses. It had a pattern. It just needed a name. Enter Linda S. Godfrey, a reporter and artist for a local newspaper called The Week. She wasn't hunting monsters when this story found her. She was hunting something far more elusive in rural Wisconsin, a decent headline that would make people actually read the paper. Small-town journalism is a peculiar profession. You cover county board meetings where the most exciting debate is about snowplow routes. You write about high school sports, church fundraisers, and who won the pie competition at the county fair. You interview the same people over and over because there are only so many people worth interviewing in a town of 10,000. It's not glamorous, but it's necessary. Local news holds communities together, keeps people informed, provides a record of the ordinary lives that never make national headlines. Godfrey had been doing this for years. She was good at it. She knew how to find the human interest angle, how to make a story about a new stoplight sound almost interesting. But she was always looking for something more. Something that would make people stop and pay attention. In late December 1991, nearly 2 years after the sightings began, someone mentioned the Bray Road reports to her. Multiple people claiming they'd seen some kind of creature. The sheriff's department had been fielding calls. Rumors were circulating at the diner, the hardware store, the post office. Godfrey's journalistic instincts activated. This was a story. Maybe not a true story, maybe not a factual story, but definitely a story worth telling. She started investigating. She contacted the sheriff's department and requested copies of the reports. She interviewed witnesses one by one, sitting in their living rooms or across from them in the diner, taking notes in her reporter's pad. What struck her was the sincerity. These weren't pranksters. These weren't attention seekers. These were ordinary people, solid citizens, who genuinely believed they'd seen something extraordinary. Lorianne and Drizzy described the creature in meticulous detail. The texture of its fur. The shape of its hands. The way it moved. She wasn't embellishing. She was reporting, trying to be as accurate as possible. Russell Patterson, the teacher, walked her through his encounter with the precision of someone used to explaining things clearly. He acknowledged it sounded crazy. He acknowledged he'd questioned his own perception. But he was certain. He'd seen it. The postal worker, the farmer, the teenagers who'd been driving around looking for excitement found more than they wanted. Each had their story. Each was convinced. Godfrey listened to all of them. She compiled the descriptions. She started drawing sketches based on what they told her. The sketches began to converge on a consistent image, a creature that was part human, part wolf, entirely impossible. She wrote the article in early 1992. She titled it The Beast of Bray Road. It was a good title. Alliterative, memorable, just ominous enough without being ridiculous. The article was straightforward. She presented the facts, the witness accounts, the sheriff's response. She didn't claim the creature was real. She didn't claim it was fake. She simply reported what people were experiencing and let readers draw their own conclusions. She included her sketches, a side view showing the hunched posture, a front view highlighting the wolf-like face, details about the hands, the fur, the eyes. The article ran in the week in late December 1991, and something unexpected happened. It exploded. Local papers picked it up. Then regional papers. Then the big papers started calling. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel sent a reporter. The Chicago Tribune mentioned it. A producer from a tabloid TV show contacted her about doing a segment. Within weeks, Bray Road went from a forgotten stretch of rural asphalt to a destination. People started driving there specifically to look for the beast. Journalists from around the Midwest descended on Elkhorn, looking for interviews, for sightings, for anything they could turn into content. Godfrey became the de facto expert. She was the one who'd named it, who'd compiled the accounts, who'd given it visual form. Reporters called her for comments. TV producers asked her to appear on shows. She became Linda Godfrey, the Beast of Bray Road investigator. It wasn't a role she'd sought, but it was one she filled. She continued collecting reports, drawing maps, compiling sightings. The creature took on more definition with each interview. 7 feet tall, covered in shaggy fur, gray-brown or dark brown or black, depending on who you asked. Walking upright but capable of dropping to all fours. Eyes that glowed red or amber or yellow in headlights. A werewolf. That's what it was, essentially. Though Godfrey avoided that word initially. Too loaded. Too ridiculous. But the cultural script was already written. Bipedal wolf creature in rural America equals werewolf. The word found its way into articles, into conversations, into the mythology of Bray Road. And once you name something, once you give it a defined shape and characteristics, it becomes more than a rumor. It becomes a phenomenon. The media attention acted as a feedback loop. Every article spawned more interest. More interest brought more visitors. More visitors meant more people looking, and more people looking meant more sightings. Were these new sightings legitimate? Were people actually encountering something? Or were they seeing what they expected to see? The line blurred. Expectation shapes perception. If you're driving down Bray Road at night looking for the beast, your brain is primed to find it. Every shadow becomes suspect. Every movement becomes significant. Godfrey recognized this. She was careful in her reporting, always noting the challenges of witness testimony, the unreliability of memory, the power of suggestion. But she also continued to collect accounts, because the phenomenon was real even if the creature wasn't. People were experiencing something. Whether that something was a physical creature or a psychological one, it was having real effects. Fear is real. Wonder is real. The need to make sense of the inexplicable is real. The Beast of Bray Road had infrastructure now. It had a name, a location, a growing bibliography of articles and reports. It had believers and skeptics. It had merchandise. Elkhorn started selling T-shirts. The diner put up the sketches on the wall. A local artist painted a mural. The economy of legend was born. And Linda Godfrey found herself at the center of it, documenting a phenomenon that was equal parts mystery, media creation, and mass psychology. She wrote a book about it, The Beast of Bray Road, Tailing Wisconsin's Werewolf, published in 2003. It became a bestseller in paranormal circles. The creature she'd helped name, helped visualize, helped bring into cultural existence had taken on a life of its own. The question of whether it was real became almost irrelevant. It was real enough to change a town, real enough to attract attention from around the world, real enough to become legend. And legends, once established, are almost impossible to kill. By 1992, Bray Road was infected, not with a creature, but with something far more contagious: attention. The pattern was predictable, almost mathematical. Media coverage increased exponentially. Local news became regional news, became national curiosity. Every article, every TV segment, every mention in a paranormal magazine acted as an amplifier. And with amplification came mutation. The story evolved in real time, shaped by each retelling, each new witness, each journalist looking for a fresh angle. The sightings spiked dramatically. What had been 1 or 2 reports per month in 1990 became weekly reports by 1992. Then almost nightly during peak periods. The creature was everywhere and nowhere, seen by dozens of people in dozens of slightly different forms. The descriptions became more elaborate. Earlier witnesses had been tentative, uncertain, qualifying their accounts with phrases like, "I think," and "it looked like," and "maybe." Later witnesses were confident, detailed, specific. They knew what they'd seen, and what they'd seen was dramatic. Now the beast had claws. Long, curved claws that scraped against pavement. Now it had fangs, visible even in darkness. Now it was aggressive, territorial, hunting. One report claimed it jumped onto the hood of a moving car, leaving dents and scratch marks. Another said it chased someone through the woods for a quarter-mile. A teenager swore it howled at him from a tree, the sound that was part wolf, part human scream. Each story fed the next. Witnesses compared notes, consciously or not. Details harmonized across accounts. The creature stabilized into a consensus image: 7 feet tall, muscular build, covered in dark fur, wolf-like face, red eyes, capable of bipedal and quadrupedal movement, aggressive toward humans. But consensus doesn't mean truth. It just means agreement. And people will agree on almost anything if enough voices say it first, loud enough, often enough. The psychology of group belief is fascinating and terrifying. Once a narrative takes hold, it becomes self-reinforcing. Confirmation bias kicks in. Ambiguous experiences get interpreted through the established framework. That shadow that moved weird must be the beast. Those scratches on your car? Probably the beast. That sound in the woods? Definitely the beast. The beast became a lens through which people interpreted their world. An explanatory framework for anything strange, anything unexplained, anything that generated a moment of fear or uncertainty. And fear, once given a name and face, spreads like wildfire through dry grass. Locals started avoiding Bray Road after dark. Not all of them, but enough to be noticeable. Enough that it became a thing you mentioned casually at the grocery store, at church, at the gas station. "Oh, I don't drive that way anymore after sunset. Just to be safe." Better safe than sorry, right? The fear was contagious, but so was the thrill. Because fear isn't only about danger. Fear is also about excitement, about breaking monotony, about feeling something intense in a life that's often comfortable and dull. Teenagers, because they're teenagers and because they're wired to seek novelty and test boundaries, started hunting for the beast. Groups of them, armed with flashlights and cameras and bravado, cruising up and down Bray Road on weekend nights. Most saw nothing. They'd drive the stretch of road a dozen times, getting progressively bored and disappointed, eventually giving up and heading to the Dairy Queen instead. Some saw shadows that moved wrong. A darker patch of darkness that seemed to shift when you looked directly at it. A shape between trees that could have been anything, but felt like something. One group, 4 kids in a pickup truck, saw glowing eyes in the woods. Paired eyes about 6 feet off the ground, watching them. They swore the eyes tracked their movement as they drove past. They didn't stop. They accelerated, tires squealing, hearts pounding, certain they'd just escaped something terrible. Later, someone would point out that 6 feet up is about where an owl might perch on a low branch. That owl eyes reflect light intensely. That fear makes you see what you expect to see. But in the moment, those kids believed. They'd encountered the beast, survived to tell the tale, and would tell it for the rest of their lives. The local economy adapted. The bar started selling a drink called the Beast, whiskey, Red Bull, and grenadine, served in a tall glass with a plastic claw as garnish. It was terrible. People ordered it anyway. The diner put up a framed sketch on the wall next to the specials board and the signed photo of a minor celebrity who'd stopped there once in 1987. Home of the Beast, the caption read, which was technically true if you interpreted home loosely enough. A souvenir shop opened on Highway 67, just outside Elkhorn proper. Beast of Bray Road t-shirts, bumper stickers, coffee mugs, baseball caps. Postcards showing an artist's interpretation of the creature, with greetings from Elkhorn, Wisconsin in retro lettering. Snow globes where instead of snow, brown fur-like material swirled around a tiny werewolf figure. Tourism increased. Not dramatically, not enough to transform the local economy, but noticeably. People would drive through on weekend trips, stop at the diner for lunch, buy a t-shirt, drive down Bray Road hoping to see something, then continue on their way. The mythology had become economy. The legend had become industry. And once economic incentives are in place, the legend becomes harder to challenge. Too many people benefit from its existence, whether they believe in it or not. But beneath the commerce and the tourism and the media attention, something stranger was happening. The collective experience was changing how people perceive reality, not just on Bray Road, but in general. If a monster could exist on a rural Wisconsin road, what else might exist? What other impossibilities might be possible? The Beast opened a door in people's imaginations, and through that door, all sorts of things came creeping in. Suddenly, other paranormal reports increased across the region. UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters in neighboring counties. Ghost stories that had been dormant for decades suddenly resurfaced with new details, new witnesses, new urgency. It was as if the Beast had given people permission to believe, permission to report experiences they've been dismissing or suppressing, permission to take the impossible seriously. Elkhorn held a Beast Festival in the summer of 1993. It was modest, almost apologetic. A few vendor tents, a local band, some grilled food. The mayor gave a speech that carefully balanced civic pride with plausible deniability. Whether you believe in the Beast or not, it certainly put Elkhorn on the map. Hundreds attended. Families with children. Cryptozoology enthusiasts who'd driven from 3 states away. Journalists looking for human interest angles. Skeptics who came to mock and stayed because they were curious despite themselves. Linda Godfrey was there, signing copies of articles, talking to people about their experiences. She'd become something between a journalist and a folklorist, documenting not just sightings but the cultural phenomenon surrounding them. She noticed something interesting. Many people attending the festival didn't actually believe in the Beast. They knew it was probably explainable, probably ordinary wildlife misidentified under poor conditions. But they liked the story. They liked having a local legend. They liked being part of something unusual. Belief and entertainment had merged into something new. The Beast was real in a way that Santa Claus is real for children. Not physically true, but emotionally and socially meaningful. A shared fiction that created genuine connections, genuine experiences, genuine memories. And in that sense, the Beast was succeeding beyond what any physical creature could accomplish. It was bringing people together, creating community identity, giving this small Wisconsin town something distinctive, something memorable, something that made it more than just another on a map. But there was a darker undercurrent too. Because fear, even when it's entertaining, still has teeth. Some people were genuinely terrified. Elderly residents who'd lived on Bray Road for decades started keeping guns by their beds. Parents forbade their teenagers from driving certain routes at night. A farmer reported shooting at something near his livestock, convinced the Beast was after his animals. Nothing was ever found. No body. No blood. Just some frightened cattle and spent shotgun shells. The line between fun and fear, between entertainment and genuine dread, was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. And people were starting to notice that line, starting to wonder which side they were on. By 1994, the phenomenon had reached critical mass. It couldn't get bigger without collapsing under its own weight. The media had moved on to other stories. The tourists were still coming, but in smaller numbers. The reports continued, but with less frequency, less certainty. The beast was still there, supposedly. Still roaming Bray Road, still being seen occasionally. But the intensity had faded. The heat had dissipated. What remained was something between legend and memory, real enough to mention, but not real enough to worry about. Elkhorn had been transformed. Not physically, the buildings were the same, the roads unchanged. But psychologically, culturally, the town had become the place where the beast lived. That identity would stick, would become part of the town's story, would be referenced in newspaper articles and Wikipedia entries and conversation for decades to come. Fear doesn't need claws. It just needs attention. And for several years, Bray Road had everyone's attention. The question nobody was asking, or at least not asking loudly enough, was simple. What were people actually seeing? Because something was happening. Even skeptics had to acknowledge that. Too many witnesses, too many reports, too much consistency in the court details. But consistency can be learned. Expectations can shape perception. And once a template exists, once everyone knows what the beast is supposed to look like, every ambiguous experience gets filtered through that template. The human brain is a pattern-matching machine. It's evolved to find faces in clouds, predators in shadows, meaning in randomness. That ability kept our ancestors alive. But it also makes us incredibly susceptible to seeing what we expect to see. Show 100 people the same ambiguous shape in darkness and ask them what it is. The answers will cluster around familiar categories. Dog, bear, person. The outliers will be more creative, but still bounded by what's culturally available. Nobody sees a griffin anymore, or a dragon, or a chimera. Those aren't available templates in modern America. But a werewolf, a bipedal wolf creature, that's available. That's in movies, in books, in folklore. It's exotic enough to be exciting, but familiar enough to be believable. The Beast of Bray Road fit perfectly into that space between the known and the unknown. Impossible, but not too impossible. Strange, but not too strange. And once enough people see it, once enough reports accumulate, once the media gives it form and name and legitimacy, it becomes self-sustaining. The legend feeds itself. That's what was happening on Bray Road. Not a creature stalking through the Wisconsin countryside, but a story stalking through human consciousness. Growing with each telling. Evolving with each witness. Becoming more real with each person who believed. The monster was never on Bray Road. The monster was us, our fear and fascination and need for meaning projected onto the darkness. And that monster, the one we created, was far more interesting than any physical creature could ever be. Eventually, inevitably, the experts weighed in. Biologists, wildlife specialists, zoologists, psychologists. People with credentials and knowledge and perfectly reasonable explanations for what was happening on Bray Road. Their conclusions were thorough, well-researched, and profoundly unsatisfying. Dr. Robert Byrne, a wildlife biologist from the University of Wisconsin, studied the reports carefully. He visited Bray Road, examined the terrain, considered the native species. His conclusion was delivered with academic precision. The witnesses were almost certainly seeing black bears. Wisconsin has a black bear population, though not a large one. The bears are typically found in the northern forests, but they do wander. A young male looking for territory might travel considerable distances. And black bears, when they stand on their hind legs, look remarkably humanoid. They have broad shoulders, long arms, a hulking posture. In low light, through a windshield, seen briefly and unexpectedly, a standing bear could absolutely be mistaken for a bipedal creature. The fur color matches, the size matches, the general shape matches, the glowing eyes, tapetum lucidum, the reflective layer behind the retina that many animals have. It makes eyes appear to glow when light hits them. Bears have it. So do deer, dogs, cats, raccoons. The color varies based on angle, light intensity, and species, but amber and red are both common. The aggressive behavior reported in some accounts. Bears can be aggressive, especially if startled or protecting food. A bear feeding on roadkill might react to an approaching car by standing up, assessing the threat. To a frightened observer, that assessment could feel like aggression. Dr. Byrne's explanation was detailed and convincing. It accounted for nearly every reported characteristic of the beast. It was the rational, scientific answer. Nobody wanted to hear it. Other experts proposed different animals. Dr. Lisa Chen, a mammalogist, suggested large dogs gone feral. German shepherds or malamutes that had escaped or been abandoned, surviving in the wild, moving in ways that seemed unnatural because they were starving or injured. Mange was brought up repeatedly. Sarcoptic mange, a parasitic infection that causes severe hair loss, can transform a normal dog or coyote into something nightmarish. The fur falls out in patches. The skin becomes thick and wrinkled. The animal's behavior changes, becomes erratic, unpredictable. They might stand oddly, move strangely, seem aggressive when they're actually just suffering. A mangy coyote standing on its hind legs in darkness, seen briefly by a startled driver, could look like almost anything. The brain, searching for a framework to understand what it's seeing, might land on monster faster than diseased animal. Then there were the psychological explanations. Dr. Amanda Morrison, a cognitive psychologist, spoke about the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, especially under stress. She cited studies showing how memory is constructive, not reproductive. We don't record experiences like a camera. We reconstruct them, and that reconstruction is influenced by everything we know, believe, and expect. Show someone a brief, ambiguous stimulus in poor lighting conditions. Ask them about it immediately. Their description will be uncertain, full of qualifiers. Ask them about it a week later. The qualifiers disappear. The description becomes more confident, more detailed. Ask them after they've read articles about what they might have seen. The description conforms to the available narrative. This isn't lying. This isn't fabrication. This is how human memory works. We fill in gaps. We smooth over inconsistencies. We create coherence where there was confusion. The witnesses on Bray Road weren't making things up, but they were remembering things that might not have happened quite the way they remembered. Their brains were doing what brains do, making sense of insufficient data by borrowing from cultural templates. Pareidolia was discussed extensively. The human tendency to see patterns, especially faces, in random stimuli. It's why we see the man in the moon, faces in clouds, Jesus on toast. Our brains are wired to detect faces because face detection is crucial for social interaction and threat assessment. In darkness, surrounded by trees and shadows, that face detection system goes into overdrive. A cluster of branches becomes a face. A pattern of light and dark becomes eyes. Movement in peripheral vision becomes a body. The brain assembles these fragments into something coherent, something threatening, something that makes evolutionary sense to fear. Mass hysteria, or more accurately, collective behavior influenced by suggestion. Not the dramatic feigning en masse kind portrayed in old movies, but the quieter version, where one person's experience primes others to have similar experiences, where expectations shape perceptions across a community. It's well documented in psychology. Someone reports seeing something unusual. Others become alert, looking for the same thing. Their elevated attention makes them more likely to notice ambiguous stimuli that they would normally ignore or dismiss. That ambiguous stimulus gets interpreted through the filter of the initial report. Soon, multiple people are reporting similar experiences, not because they're experiencing the same phenomenon, but because they're interpreting different phenomena through the same lens. All of these explanations made sense. All of them were supported by evidence, by research, by scientific understanding of wildlife behavior and human psychology. Collectively, they could account for virtually every reported sighting on Bray Road. The problem was, they made the witnesses feel dismissed, invalidated, as if their experience didn't matter, or worse, as if they were being called stupid or gullible. When someone tells you they saw a monster, and you tell them it was probably a bear, you're not just offering an explanation. You're taking away their experience. You're saying the thing that terrified them, that changed how they see the world, that gave them a story they'll tell for the rest of their lives, was actually ordinary. And people don't want ordinary. Especially not when extraordinary felt so viscerally real. There's a deeper discomfort with these scientific explanations beyond just deflating someone's exciting story. The explanations force us to confront how unreliable we are, how our senses deceive us, how our memories reconstruct themselves, how our brains fill in massive gaps with fabricated detail. We like to think we're reliable observers of reality, that we see what's there, that our memories are accurate, that if we're certain about something, we're probably right. But the science says otherwise. We're terrible observers. Our memories are fiction dressed up as fact. Certainty has almost no correlation with accuracy. We can be absolutely convinced of something that never happened. That's an uncomfortable truth. It's easier to believe in monsters than to accept that our own minds are unreliable narrators. So the scientific explanations were filed away, acknowledged and ignored in equal measure. They existed as a counterpoint, a footnote, something to mention if pressed. But they didn't change anything. Because the beast was never really about what was actually on Bray Road. It was about what Bray Road made people feel. And feelings don't submit to rational analysis. Fear is real, even when its source isn't. Wonder is genuine, even when its object is imaginary. The need for mystery, for something beyond the mundane, for a world that's stranger and more interesting than consensus reality suggests, that need is fundamentally human. The beast satisfied that need. A bear, no matter how compelling the evidence, couldn't satisfy it in the same way. So the experts offered their explanations. The witnesses politely disagreed. The believers continued believing. The skeptics continued skepticizing. And Bray Road continued being the place where something, whether bear or beast or mass delusion, had captured the collective imagination. The real question, the one nobody wanted to ask because the answer was too unsettling, was this: does it matter if the beast was real? Does the objective truth change the subjective experience? Does knowing it was probably a bear diminish the fear someone felt in that moment? Maybe not. Maybe the experience is what matters. Maybe the story is what endures, regardless of what actually happened. Or maybe that's just what we tell ourselves when we can't accept that the world is exactly as mundane as it appears. Somewhere around 1995, something changed. The beast didn't disappear. Not exactly. Legends don't disappear. They fade. They recede. They settle into the background of cultural memory, like sediment on a riverbed. The reports became sporadic. One in April. Nothing until July. One in October. Then silence for months. The frequency dropped below the threshold of phenomenon. Below the point where it felt like something was happening and crossed into the realm of isolated incidents. People stopped talking about it as much. Not because they'd stopped believing or stopped caring, but because there was nothing new to say. The story had been told. The articles had been written. The skeptics had made their arguments. The believers had made theirs. Everyone had taken their positions and dug in. Without new fuel, the fire guttered. Bray Road went back to being a road. The same stretch of cracked asphalt it had always been. The corn still grew in summer. The snow still fell in winter. Cars still drove its length, heading somewhere else, using it as a passage rather than a destination. The fog still rolled in on cold nights. The woods still loomed dark on either side. The curve near the cemetery still made newcomers tap their brakes. But the weight had lifted. That particular quality of dread, that heightened awareness that had characterized the road for nearly 5 years, had dissipated. You could drive Bray Road at night now without that prickling on the back of your neck, without checking your rearview mirror compulsively, without half expecting something to emerge from the tree line. The town moved on. The diner eventually took down the framed sketch, replaced it with a photo of the 1996 state championship football team. The bar stopped serving the beast because nobody ordered it anymore. The souvenir shop closed, its inventory of unsold t-shirts boxed up and stored in a basement somewhere, destined for future ironic vintage appeal. Tourism returned to normal levels. People still mention the beast sometimes, usually as a curiosity, a fun local legend. But it had lost its urgency, its immediacy, its power to provoke genuine fear or fascination. Linda Godfrey continued collecting reports, but they came in slower now. And the ones that did come felt different. Less detailed. Less certain. More like people checking a box, fulfilling an expectation, rather than reporting a genuine encounter that had shaken their worldview. The witnesses, the original ones from 1989 through 1992, still told their stories. At family gatherings, at work parties, whenever the conversation turned toward the strange and unexplained. They'd tell about the night they saw the beast, and people would listen politely, react appropriately, but without the intensity that those stories once commanded. Because the cultural moment had passed. The beast had been exciting when it was current, when it felt like something was actively happening, when each new report added to a growing narrative. But once the narrative stabilized, once it became history rather than ongoing phenomenon, the excitement faded. This is how most paranormal phenomena end. Not with proof or debunking, not with final answers or climactic revelations. They just peter out. Interest wanes. Attention moves elsewhere. The story becomes part of the background, something that happened once, back when, to people who are now older and less certain than they used to be. But something remained. Something subtle and hard to articulate. If you drove Bray Road late at night, alone, when the fog was thick and visibility was poor, you could still feel it. Not the beast. Not anything specific or nameable. Just a quality to the darkness. A weight to the silence. The road remembered. That's how it felt. The road remembered the fear that had soaked into it, the stories that had been told about it, the transformation it had undergone from ordinary rural byway to legendary monster habitat. Places hold memory in a way that's not quite physical and not quite supernatural. It's cultural, psychological, perceptual. A place where something significant happened, even if that something was only significant in human minds, becomes different. Chain. Mark. Bray Road had been marked by the beast, whether the beast was real or not. That mark would never fully fade. Decades later, people would still mention it. Oh, you're taking Bray Road? That's where that werewolf thing was. Remember that? And they would remember. Not the details, those would blur and shift. But the feeling, the shape of the story, the fact that something strange had happened there once, something that brought people together in fear and fascination and belief. Some of the witnesses, the ones who really believed they'd seen something, carried it with them. It became part of their identity, part of how they understood the world and their place in it. They'd had an experience that most people didn't have. They'd seen something most people hadn't seen. That made them special, set them apart. For some, that was empowering. They'd encountered the unknown and survived. They had a story that commanded attention, that made people lean in and listen. For others, it was isolating. They knew what they'd seen, but they couldn't prove it, couldn't make people truly believe them, couldn't translate the visceral reality of their experience into something others could fully grasp. Years later, some would start to doubt. The human mind is remarkably good at revising itself. Memories that once felt concrete become questionable. Details that were certain become fuzzy. The conviction that powered the initial report weakens under the weight of time and skepticism. Maybe it was a dog. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe the angle was weird. Maybe my mind played tricks. But late at night, alone in bed, staring at the ceiling, doubt would wobble. Because they remembered how it felt in that moment. The spike of adrenaline. The certainty that flooded through them. The primal recognition that they were in the presence of something wrong. Something that shouldn't exist. Feelings don't lie, even when facts do. That's what they tell themselves. That's what kept the belief alive, even as rational thought tried to erode it. The beast was gone. Probably. Possibly. In the way that things are gone when they were never really there to begin with, or in the way that things are gone when they finish serving their purpose. Because maybe the beast had a purpose. Maybe it emerged when the town needed it, gave them what they needed, and receded when that need was fulfilled. Or maybe that's just narrative thinking, the human compulsion to find meaning in patterns, to believe that things happen for reasons rather than randomly. Either way, Bray Road was quiet now. The sightings had stopped. The fear had faded. The legend had settled into comfortable familiarity. But the road still felt different. Still felt watched. Still carried that particular quality that comes from being the site of shared belief, shared fear, shared experience. Maybe that's all hauntings really are. Not ghosts or monsters or supernatural phenomena, but the residue of human emotion and attention, thick enough to change the quality of a place even after the people and their fears have moved on. Bray Road was haunted, but not by the beast. It was haunted by the idea of the beast, by the years when people believed, by the collective imagination that had transformed an ordinary road into something legendary. And that kind of haunting, the kind that exists in minds rather than in matter, never really ends. Let's be honest now. Let's strip away the mystery and the mythology and look at what actually happened on Bray Road. A small town, isolated and unremarkable, experiences a series of sightings over several years. The sightings are inconsistent. based on brief encounters and poor visibility, reported by tired people whose brains were already halfway to sleep, operating under conditions that make accurate perception nearly impossible. A reporter, looking for a story that will make people pay attention, gives these disparate sightings a name and a narrative structure. The name sticks because it's good. The narrative grows because narratives want to grow. Stories have momentum. They want to continue, to expand, to take on new chapters. Media coverage amplifies the phenomenon. Every article brings more attention. More attention brings more people looking. More people looking brings more sightings. Each sighting reinforces the narrative. The narrative shapes future sightings. The loop tightens and accelerates. Fear spreads through the community. Not because there's a creature, but because fear is itself a creature. It hunts, it multiplies, it adapts to its environment. It doesn't need evidence to survive. It just needs opportunity, and small-town isolation provides abundant opportunity. The Beast of Bray Road was a mirror. It reflected what the community needed at that particular moment in time. Mystery in a place where mystery was scarce. Identity in a town that struggled to define what made it different from 1,000 other small towns. A shared experience in a place where shared experiences were mostly limited to high school sports and county fairs and the occasional tragic accident. The Beast gave people something to talk about. Something to fear together. Something that made Elkhorn more than just a dot on a map between Milwaukee and Madison. It gave the town a story, and stories create identity. When that need faded, when the town had absorbed the story into its collective identity and moved on to other concerns, the Beast faded too. Because the Beast was never autonomous. It was never independent. It was always a projection, a reflection, a manifestation of human psychology operating under specific conditions. This isn't to say the witnesses were lying. That's the easy dismissal, and it's wrong. The witnesses weren't lying. They were doing what all humans do, making sense of insufficient sensory data by filling in gaps with culturally available templates. They saw something. They all saw something. A shape in darkness. Movement at the edge of perception. Eyes that reflected light. These stimuli were real. The interpretation was where things got complicated. Because interpretation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a context. When you live in a town where everyone's talking about a wolf creature, where the newspaper has run articles with detailed descriptions and sketches, where the cultural conversation is saturated with beast imagery, your brain has a template ready. When ambiguous stimulus meets prepared template, the match is almost inevitable. The brain doesn't register unknown shape in darkness. It registers the Beast of Bray Road. The sensation of uncertainty gets transformed into the certainty of recognition. This is how mass sightings work across cultures and throughout history. In medieval Europe, people saw demons and angels. In the 1950s, people saw UFOs and aliens. In the 1980s and 90s, in rural Wisconsin, people saw a werewolf. The underlying psychology is identical. The specific manifestation depends on what's culturally available, what's been discussed, what's plausible within the belief system of the time and place. The real monster on Bray Road wasn't a creature. It was panic itself. The way it moved from person to person, shape-shifting with each transmission, growing stronger with every skeptic it converted into a believer. Panic doesn't need to be rational. It doesn't need evidence. It doesn't need physical form. It just needs to be possible. And on a dark road in rural Wisconsin, surrounded by woods that held 1,000 ordinary explanations and one extraordinary one, the extraordinary felt more true. Because extraordinary is more interesting than ordinary. Extraordinary gives life texture and meaning. Extraordinary transforms you from someone who drives home from work on familiar roads into someone who has encountered the unknown and lived to tell about it. The Beast didn't stalk Bray Road. We did. We stalked it with our flashlights and cameras and expectations. We built the Beast from shadows and suggestion, and the deep human need for there to be more to the world than what's immediately visible. We gave it form with our fear and fascination. We made it real by believing it could be. We sustained it through collective attention and cultural transmission. We gave it life in the only way that really matters, through shared belief and shared narrative. And when we stopped believing, when our attention moved elsewhere, when the story had been told enough times to lose its power, the Beast disappeared. Not because it was never there, but because it was only ever us. The most uncomfortable truth about the Beast of Bray Road is that it reveals how unreliable we are, how easily influenced, how readily we construct reality from partial information and cultural expectations, how powerfully belief shapes perception. We want to think we're rational creatures who respond to evidence and update our beliefs accordingly. The Beast of Bray Road suggests otherwise. It suggests we're storytelling creatures who construct narratives and then selectively attend to anything that confirms those narratives while dismissing anything that contradicts them. That's a hard thing to accept. It means we can't fully trust our own experiences. It means certainty is often inversely correlated with accuracy. It means the things that feel most true might be the least reliable. But maybe that's okay. Maybe being storytelling creatures isn't a flaw. Maybe it's a feature. Stories create meaning, build community, help us navigate complexity. The Beast brought Elkhorn together. It gave people a shared experience, a common story, a piece of collective identity. Yes, the Beast was probably just misidentified wildlife, optical illusions, and suggestibility operating in a feedback loop. But the experience of the Beast was real. The fear was real. The wonder was real. The way it changed people's relationship to their landscape and to each other was real. Maybe that's enough. Maybe the question of whether the Beast was objectively real is less important than the fact that it was subjectively real for the people who experienced it. Or maybe that's just another story we tell ourselves to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. The Beast of Bray Road doesn't exist. It never existed. But for several years in the early 1990s, it was one of the most real things in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Real enough to change behavior, transform economy, reshape identity, create lasting memory. That's the paradox at the heart of every legend, every myth, every shared delusion. Falsehood can have truth-like effects. Belief creates reality, even when what's believed isn't true. The real monster was never on Bray Road. The real monster was, and always has been, the space between what we see and what we think we see. The gap between experience and interpretation. The distance between what happens and what we remember happening. That gap is where monsters live. All of them. Every creature that's ever haunted human imagination emerged from that particular darkness. Not from forests or swamps or abandoned buildings, but from the uncertainty in our own perception, the unreliability of our own minds. We are the haunted house. We are the dark forest. We carry the monsters with us, projected outward onto the world, made manifest through belief and shared storytelling. The Beast of Bray Road was never the monster. Panic was. And panic, unlike werewolves, is absolutely real. I drove Bray Road last autumn. October, actually. Late in the month, close enough to Halloween that the cultural air was thick with acceptable fear. Permission to be scared. Permission to indulge in the possibility of the impossible. I went specifically to see, to understand what all those people experienced, to feel what they felt. It's exactly as described in all the reports, all the articles, all the retellings. 2 lanes of weathered asphalt, no streetlights, bordered by fields that were harvested bare. The corn had been cut weeks earlier. What remained were jagged brown stalks poking up from dark earth, creating a texture that was simultaneously ordered and chaotic. The tree lines on both sides were thick with October growth, leaves turned but not yet fallen. The kind of woods that look beautiful in daylight and ominous after dark. I went at night, naturally. That's when everything happened. That's when the Beast emerged from legend into reported reality. Going during the day would have missed the point entirely. It was cold. Not freezing, but cold enough that I could see my breath when I got out of the car. Cold enough that the heater in my rental car struggled to keep up. Cold enough that the chill settled into your bones if you stood still too long. Fog was rolling in from the fields, the way it does on clear, cold nights in rural Wisconsin. Ground fog, thick and low, hovering maybe 3 feet off the pavement. My headlights cut through it in weak, diffuse beams that made distance impossible to judge accurately. I drove slowly, 20 miles per hour on a road where the speed limit was 55. Nobody passed me. Nobody else was out. For 15 minutes of driving back and forth on that 3-mile stretch, I was completely alone. I watched the tree line, scanned for movement, for shapes, for eyes that might catch the light. I listened for sounds that didn't belong, though with the windows up and the heater running, I wouldn't have heard much anyway. Nothing happened. No glowing eyes emerged from the darkness. No hulking shape crossed the road. No moment of primal terror rewired my understanding of reality. No adrenaline spike that would power a story I'd tell for the rest of my life. Just a road. Just fog. Just the ordinary darkness of rural Wisconsin on a cold October night. I stopped the car near the curve by the cemetery. Shut off the engine. Killed the headlights. Sat in complete darkness for 5 minutes, letting my eyes adjust, trying to see what the darkness held. Trees. Fields. Distant farmhouse lights, maybe a mile away. The outline of the cemetery fence. Nothing else. Nothing unusual. Nothing that shouldn't be there. And somehow that was the most unsettling part. Not because I expected to see something. I'm not that credulous. I know the beast isn't real, wasn't real, was never anything more than misidentified animals and psychological suggestion operating in a feedback loop. But the absence felt meaningful. The complete ordinariness of the experience felt like a message, though I couldn't decode what that message meant. Maybe it meant that the beast exists only when believed in. That it requires the right combination of expectation, fear, and cultural priming to manifest. That I, coming armed with skepticism and knowledge and the comfort of multiple explanations, was inoculated against seeing it. Or maybe it meant that there never was anything to see. That every single report was exactly what the scientists said: bears, dogs, deer at weird angles, optical illusions, tired brains making sense of insufficient data. I started the car again. Drove the length of Bray Road one more time. Slowly, attentively, open to the possibility of the impossible, while remaining rooted in the probable. Still nothing. Just a road. Just Wisconsin countryside doing what countryside does at night. Being dark, being quiet, being exactly what's always been. I left feeling ambivalent. Disappointed, maybe, which is absurd. Disappointed that I didn't see a monster that doesn't exist. That's the power of legend. Even knowing it's not real, part of you wants it to be. Wants the world to be stranger and more interesting than it is. Wants magic to leak through the cracks of mundane reality. But here's what I realized driving back to my hotel in Elkhorn. The beast was real. Not physically real, not objectively real, but real in every way that mattered to the people who experienced it. It changed their lives. It gave them stories. It connected them to each other and to their landscape in ways they wouldn't have been connected otherwise. It made them feel wonder and terror and aliveness. It reminded them that the world is larger and stranger than everyday life suggests. That's real. That's as real as anything gets. The Beast of Bray Road wasn't on Bray Road that night I drove it. Maybe it never was. But it was in Elkhorn. It was in the stories people still tell at the diner. In the references that pop up in local conversation. In the way people smile when you mention it, part nostalgia, part humor, part something harder to name. It's in the way people still describe the town to outsiders. Oh, Elkhorn? That's where the Beast of Bray Road was. It's become part of the town's identity, inseparable from its history, as much a fixture as the gazebo in the town square or the high school mascot. Bray Road is still there. Quiet. Unremarkable. A shortcut between two slightly larger roads. The fog still rolls in on cold nights. The darkness still presses against your headlights. The woods still loom on either side. And if you drive it late enough, tired enough, alone enough, maybe you'll see something too. Not because it's there, but because you need it to be. Because humans need mystery. Need the possibility that the world is bigger than what we can measure and categorize and explain. The Beast of Bray Road was never the monster. It was never the point. The point was always what the beast revealed about us. Our fears, our needs, our incredible capacity to create meaning from shadows. Our desperate, beautiful, very human need for there to be something more. Maybe there is something more. Maybe there isn't. Maybe the question is less important than the asking. Bray Road is still there, waiting, not for a monster, but for the next person who needs to believe in one. And that person will come. They always do. Because the beast never really left. It's just waiting. In the fog. In the darkness. In that space between what we see and what we think we see. Where all monsters live. Where they've always lived. Where they always will.